Hey folks, in this video we're going to take the water pump from the VFR750, this guy right here, and we're going to rebuild it with this kit right here and follow these instructions, which are about 800 pages. Well, maybe not, but I'm going to show you what we're going to do in this video, so let's get right to it. This is where I sourced the kit, azv65.com, in the screenshot. I will put a link in the description for this website. This is a very excellent kit. The machining is exceptional. The parts are very high quality. I have a little bit of concern about the directions. They're a little bit scattered around, but once you go through them, it's not too terrible, and that required me actually to give him a phone call to clarify a few things. Other than that, though, this is just the way to go. It's apparently the 65 in his website name is in reference to the V65, so they must share the same water pump with the VFR, which I did not know. If you have any other direct questions about this kit, you need to contact him. Go to that link in the description for this website, click the contact information, and like I said before, he'll get back to you really quick and answer your questions. You'll need two additional things to do this. You'll need Honda Bond HT, which is the Honda Bond High Temp, and Loctite 640, which is the sleeve retainer. You will likewise also need to either make or adapt tools to push or push out and then push back in components, like the bearing assembly and so forth. I had to make them, and you'll see that in this video. But you probably can adapt some sockets to do it. We're going to pull the water pump out of this and do a rebuild on it. I have a rebuild kit, and I'm going to show you that. And we're going to show you some detail on rebuilding it, which I have really no idea how to do this, except from what I read. And I talked to the gentleman that sells the kits, but this was like a month and a half ago. I just haven't been able to get to this till now. And so it is a little complicated, and I'll try to explain it. But his printed material is copyrighted, so I'm not going to be able to show you any of that, but I will kind of give you the generalities of it. This is more for entertainment than anything else, because it'll probably explode when I do certain operations on it, like try to press the main bearing shaft out. Spoiler alert. So, yeah. The first thing we got to do here is take the side, just the left side fairing off. Don't need the right side fairing for this. Off, that is. Got to drain the oil and the coolant, and then we'll pull the water pump out. Put that over here with the other POP pile of parts. Jeez, I did have to pull the right inner cowling out, the cover, the trim, get at the radiator cap just to crack it loose, because otherwise this take about 8,000 years to drain. But now it's going to shoot out like I used to pee when I was young. I long for those days. I remember that. I'm going to reuse the coolant. I've had it out a couple times before doing stuff, so no reason not to. If you're ever doing this, though, make sure that you check at least, or preferably replace this crush washer that's on the drain, because otherwise they can leak. And I verified that's not where the leak's coming from. I did a classic reach around with a mirror, and I could see that it's wet up in there. Where the weep hole is still, it isn't dripping, but it did for a little bit. That's how I noticed it. But it's still damp up in there, So it definitely needs to be definitely needs to be done. So now we'll crack off these coolant lines. One here comes down from the radiator itself, the bottom of the radiator. The other one attaches to this tube that goes up to the crossover and into the heads. Exits on the other side, or maybe it comes in the other side. I don't know where the thermostat is. I don't know. I haven't studied it, but it doesn't really matter now, does it? Things being a pain. There it goes. Now I'll just drain the oil, which was going to be discarded, of course. Now watch, if there's water, I wasn't very tight. If there's water in it, then I want to be extra upset. Wouldn't think so. Doesn't look like chocolate milk, so that's always a good thing. Molasses. Like I said, if it looked like chocolate milk coming out, then I'd be like, oh my God. Yeah, scrap the motor. But I don't believe, and the reason why I mention it is I don't believe that there's any leakage of coolant going to the inside of the engine. I have an earlier video where I did replace the seal on the back of this water pump because it was the one that was on there was dislodged. And so what we're going to do is replace that again because one of those comes in the kit. You know, getting a water pump out of these bikes just isn't very difficult at all. It really isn't. You know, you just do a couple things that I did already, and there's plenty of room here. It just goes straight in. You gotta remember which bolts. Two of these bolts or one of these bolts holds it into the case. I don't remember. It might be these two. So we'll take these two guys out. If they're long bolts, then we know we got the right ones. Nope. Come on, baby. You just pull you out straight. There it goes, and it doesn't want to go because it's got an O-ring on it. All right, so here's the back edge, and that's the way the seal's supposed to go. I had some people argue with me on that when I first put it in, but that's the way it's supposed to go, as far as I know, and or knew. So that's in, no problem with that. What we're going to do first on this, before we forget to do it, is we're going to take a, see there's no thrust movement, so that's good. We're going to take a depth mic, and we're going to measure this surface to that surface because that's critical to duplicate when we put the new parts in. Otherwise it may engage with the oil pump, and let me show you that where that goes there in case you're curious. And so that little slotted guy right there is off the oil pump, and so this guy right here, you know, this guy right here articulates with that. So you can see the importance of having this offset the same, because if it's wrong when we push this in and it's, let's say it's too deep, it could actually bottom in that slot on that basically like a screwdriver slot sticking out there that articulates with this one and cause significant damage to the water pump or oil pump, yeah, or both. So like I said, we're gonna measure that first and then write it down, and then we're gonna take this apart and I'll go over the you know, the general idea of what you need to do to rebuild this with the kit that I have. As always, TP for the bunghole.
I need TP for my bunghole.
We're going to check it in two places though, just to make sure. You know, because, you know, it's not like I overcomplicate things. I mean, when do I ever do that? 475 even, whatever that is in metric. I don't know, do the calculations. 475 even. Okay. So that's the number we're going to write down, 475 thou. We can take the cover off. Get that out of the way, we need to. Whoa, stay still. It's getting a little bit, it's getting freaky on me. Come on, baby. All right, so the inside of one of these water pumps is very typical. You have your impeller. You have your O-ring, which sits in a groove, machined or cast in this case, into the outer cover. We have a new one of that as well. You've got two locating pins that are in the cover, so if they're not in the cover, they're stuck in the body. You take them out. We'll leave them in the cover. We don't have to worry about that. And then this is the thing we're going to work on. All right, so let me review those instructions. Again, I can't show you the instructions verbatim because they're copyrighted, but I'm going to go ahead and just kind of give you generalities. I mean, it feels good, but you know, there's a special seal, a ceramic, I think it is, seal, and you'll see it when we go to put it back together. It's very fiddly what you got to do with that seal, and that's what seals off the water side from the oil side, and this seal essentially keeps the oil from going that way, or vice versa. I don't know. So you have basically two seals, the oil seal side and the water side seal, you know, side seal, seal side, whatever you want to say. We're just going to get this seal out. I'll show you the inside of that bore. I don't mean to bore you, but this is the way it is, you know. Come on, you. There you are. All right, now the inside of the bore is right there. So you can see the outer bearing, and you can see that little ring around the rosy there, which is probably a little chamfer on the end of the bearing, and you can see it in relationship to the bore. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mic up the new one that goes in, and we'll turn something that's just, I don't know, 10 thou or so smaller, and then we'll also bore it for this size so it locates itself nicely. Make sure we have enough depth in there. We'll make it fairly long, said the wife.
That's what she said.
and then we'll go ahead and put this in the press and see what happens. You know, I have no idea why I'm making this so deep.
That's what she said!
I'm thinking that the shaft is not going to move with the bearing. It really only needs to be a little deeper than the how far the bearing or the shaft sticks out of the bearing. So, oh well. Not going to hurt it at all. Ow! Okay, so this is the driver tool for it. The bore is cut so it just fits over fairly close to the center of the shaft. And then the ID of that, or I should say the OD of the bearing, is just over 1 inch, just like the instruction says. It's like 1 inch and 20 thou or something like that. This stock was 1 inch, actually just under 1 inch. So all I did was skim it a few thou. So this is around, I didn't like it even. I don't know, probably around 970, 960. So there's plenty that's sitting on the outer edge of that bearing inside there. Push that through. Made a little chamfer relief because the seal's a little proud of the outside of the bearing. So that way it's sitting nice and flush. So we're going to eat some lunch, come back, and we're going to push this thing out. But for you guys, it'll be instantaneous. Now I'm ready to press this. We need to set it up on these press plates so the impeller is completely clear, and the only place that is on the fixed part of the press is the actual body of the water pump. And of course we're pretty close on this edge right here, so to be certain that I'm not going to overlap that and screw that up and totally decimate my impeller, I'm going to go ahead and clean off these plates that go on the press arm, the bottom of the press. Excuse me. And we're going to kind of look at it this way and see which way is going to make sure it's clear. Something like that. And plenty of play in there. So we just line it up to these lines when we go to press it. We know we're going to be clear of the impeller on our press plates. Okay, time to determine whether we're going to be heroes or zeros. So I'm touched off, very little pressure. Double, triple check that the impeller is clear. And of course my little tracing proves that. Instructions also say to make sure that the water pipe is not contacting any part of the surface. I don't see how that would happen if you're on a flat piece, but in the instructions he shows a special jig that he made that actually has 2 threaded M6 holes to hold it in place. That way it doesn't move. That's a really good idea. If I had a block of aluminum, I'd make one, but I don't have that. And this will be fine, maybe. When I talked to this fellow on the phone about this a couple of weeks ago or a month or so ago, he said you got to put a couple of tons of force on this thing, and then as you do that and you heat it up, you're going to hear it pop. So we're just going to kind of preload it a little bit and start heating it. And there it goes. See? You hear that? You just let go. Tell you what we're going to do now. Since it's moving, we're going to go ahead and put some oil down in there, like some light oil to help it out, or penetrating oil. I mean, why not? It's not going to hurt nothing. I don't want that to fall on the floor, so I need to put something in here to catch it. There it goes. Okay, we'll let this stuff cool down, then we'll take a look at it. Go ahead and take a look at the housing. Housing looks good. There's no cracks. This must be some sort of sealant they use when they put these together, whoever builds them for Honda. That is the weep hole on the bottom. You can see it right there. And it comes out through this little slotted area, which is obviously covered up so shit doesn't go directly up into it from the road. It's kind of like a shield, but you can see that hole right there. All right. And the bore looks great. So that definitely worked. Definitely. Heating that up, you would have definitely not been able to get that out with just pushing on it without destroying this thing. I guarantee it. Guarantee it. I mean, you heard that thing let go. Okay, so here is your bearing. I'm just going to call it a bearing, not necessarily a bearing shaft, just a bearing. That's really what it's called. This whole thing, the shaft and all, is the bearing. We need to press the bearing out of the impeller. We're going to keep the impeller, we're going to keep the housing, everything else gets replaced. The seal is what goes up against the ceramic seal in there, and there's a spring, like spring pressure, and that seals that off, which is obviously was failing to allow it to come out the weep hole. So what we need to do is we need to fixture this up somehow so we can push very evenly on this impeller. It's not all that strong, by getting as close to the center of the bearing itself, the shaft of the bearing, okay? The instructions recommend using a, what do you call it, a bearing splitter, like a 2-inch bearing splitter, you know, the kind that has 2 bolts and you kind of clamp it on a bearing and it's tapered and it'll push a bearing away from a fixed surface, like off a shaft or something. So I don't have one of those. I did make a special tool for this, which I'll show you maybe if I can use it, but I did not factor in that this would be in there. I used the new bearing as a guide to make this thing. I forgot all about the fact that this stuff would be in here. So I have 2 choices. Either I just cut off this thing and then push it out that way, which I could do. There's no reason why I couldn't. Or I could just take a pair of dikes and go in here and, just kind of cut this stuff out. I think I'm just going to go over and put it in the other vise and just take a cut-off saw and just whack this thing right off. There's no reason why this needs to be kept, because we're going to replace the whole thing. So it'll save a lot of time and energy, and then the tool will work as designed, and I'll show you that here in a minute. Well, there it is. I cut it off. Nothing else I could do. I'll show you the tool I made. Fairly kind of complicated too, but I originally designed this. So this is the replacement shaft. I originally designed this so you could take these M8 bolts out and put this in, assuming that your impeller is still on there, and this will clamp back together, and then you can just push it out, and there's enough just a little bit of clearance on this shaft, which is 12 mil. Okay, but I did not factor in the thickness and the seal being in there and occupying that real estate. So I just cut it off, so it doesn't really matter. So now essentially I could still use it, but it's going to just sit like this, and then we'll put it in the press and use a pin, and push it through. So it achieves the same thing, but damn, this is a nice tool, and I have a whole video on how I made it, so it's probably useless now as far as that to show it. But anyway, this is the shaft that's going back in, so let's go ahead and protect that right now from any damage. And butterfingers me. And this is what comes out of the inside here of the impeller. See, this is all full of junk in there. There's a rubber seal that goes in first, and then there's this what is it called, a ceramic seal, and then the spring part of the other half of the seal goes up against that, and that's destroyed now from me cutting this out, but you'll see it with the new one when it goes back in. So again, the operation we need to do right now is to go over to the press and push this out to get this shaft out, and we'll go ahead and use this, but it's unfortunate that it's not necessary to be so extravagant as far as its setup, because it doesn't even need to split apart now, but it will give us really good support on the bottom of the impeller, because it is literally barely a slip fit on that shaft. So it'll be really nice support, and this is milled nice and square, this whole block, so there's no chance of it pushing it at an angle and damaging this thing, like springing it. It's going to be sitting dead solid on this block. So I guess in one way it's okay, but another way it was kind of a waste of a lot of time and energy and material for that. All right, we're set up with my special tool and on the block here, and so that's pretty self-explanatory. The tool, the kit rather, comes with this pin. This is the pin you're going to drive through the center of that to push the shaft out, and then this nylon or neoprene guide that slips over it, and then you put your pin in, and then what it does is it holds the pin straight up and down, so it was it'll do what it needs to do for you, because otherwise that'd be kind of hard to keep that square. So we're going to try this and see if it does stay fairly square, because we got to get this as square as possible in this press. An arbor press really would be better for this. These things are sloppy as hell. So we may be able to do it nonetheless with this. Here goes nothing. There it goes. That's pretty hard. Had to go that a little bit more. Okay, so here's the impeller. No worse for the wear. And that's the recess. See if I can show you that. You can see the depth of how far that goes up before it hits the inner top surface of that impeller, and how crusty this is, which we have to really clean real well. Yeah, but the impeller looks all right, because nice flat surface here on this block, and that just went through just perfect. So it'll work, but I didn't have to do all this boring. I mean, if I thinned this out, this part, if I thinned the top part out, it'd have to be really thin, and then did the bore a little bit bigger to accommodate the size of that bearing and everything, this would still work. And I might try that, to see if we could do that, but of course I don't have another one to try. But if I ever do another one, maybe. Probably still enough material in there to do it. I left about 10 mil or so, 8 to 10 mil, so for strength. If this was steel, it'd be no brainer, but it isn't. I just didn't like the idea of using a bearing splitter because they're a little tapered, but this is definitely really square, because I milled this thing square. The only variable here is the squareness of the press, but as long as the pressing action is the relationship between the force and what your stop is square to the part, then you shouldn't have a problem. I tell you what, at the end of this video, after the outro and the ending credit thing, if you will, the ending thing with the music, stick around. I'll put the video, it's just a couple minutes long, because it's really abbreviated, of how I made this. You might find it interesting. It's a bunch of machine work on the lathe and the milling machine. So now I'm going to go ahead and do some cleaning and de-rusting. What I might do is put this in Evapo-Rust. That'll probably be the best thing. Take a break for a while, clean it up first, get any of the scum off it, and just put it in Evapo-Rust for an hour or so. And I bet you that'll take off all this crap, and then we can go ahead and reassemble it. So I'll just go ahead and do that, because I think that's the best way to do it.
Does everybody know what time it is? That's right.
All right, folks, here's our next step. We need to take this housing, and we need to press this new bearing assembly inside that housing using the tool that we made before. But remember when I said I don't need to make that hole that deep, because it's only going to go this deep to push it out? Well, I had to deepen it and bore it out even further, because we're going to use that same tool to push this one in. Remember, this is slightly smaller, about 20 or 30 thou, than the OD of this bearing. So therefore it'll be a good pusher on the way in, just like it was a good pusher on the way out. All right, so we're going to do that. I also made this tool on the lathe just a little while ago, which is just a scrap piece of aluminum with a little bit bigger than that 475, about 485, 490, because I need a little bit of play in there. I'll explain why here in a sec. Right now, actually, we're going to use this as the stand to put this on in the press. And what this is going to do is going to set our bottom protrusion, our penetration out the bottom of the housing. Remember that dimension was 475 thou. Well, that's what this hole depth is. So I over on the lathe, I took this and I drilled it out to 11.5 millimeters, and then used a boring bar to flatten it out. And it actually went a little deep. Then I faced it back so it was almost exactly 475 thou to the bottom, based upon what the depth micrometer says. Okay. Now, if I had had a 12 millimeter end mill, like a 2-fluted end mill, I would have just plunged it after I drilled it. Essentially, when you drill something like this to depth, you want to use the tip of the drill and then measure in, because the backside of the angle of the drill or the clearance rake of it. You know, the 118 included angle of the drill is not the dimension you want, otherwise the hole is going to be further in than you want it to be. So I take it from the tip of the drill, bring it in, just the tip, just for a sec, and then bring it into 475 thou, and did what I said before about squaring it up. And then now we're ready to put this in, where this thing comes down. Of course, it'll be in here, and it'll be coming through the housing. And the housing is going to keep it straight as it penetrates the end here. And this is, you know, this is concentric with the hole, and it's square to the hole. So there shouldn't be any problem with this thing, like, you know, hitting the edge or something. Plus there's a little bit of slop here to accommodate for that. Then when it gets down and hits the bottom, we won't be able to push it anymore. And that will be 475 thou, and we can measure it to double check. So the operation before this, of course, was to clean everything. So I got everything spotlessly clean, and I'm going to wipe it out and blow it out one more time with some brake clean. We have to clean this guy off really good too on the outside and clean everything up, and then use instructions suggest using a light oil. The writer or person who wrote the instructions said that he uses automatic transmission fluid. I might try that. That's not a bad idea. And then just put a little bit of that on there, and then we're going to go ahead and press it through as described just now. After that, we're going to get prepared to set up and put on the impeller, which again is a press operation, but we'll be pressing it on this end, which is going to be sticking out the inside part of the housing. All right, we'll get into the impeller here in a little bit. Of course, the other day I'm looking for fork oil. All I can find on the shelf is ATF. Today I'm looking for ATF, and all I can find is fork oil. I shortened this down about 5/8 of an inch. This bottom piece here didn't need to be that tall anyway, and that way it fits in the press here without me having to reset it, because then I have to really have a very long reach. But if I can get it nice and straight, start off with, it should push straight, and then what we'll do is we'll back off, let it find its where it wants to go, and then do that a couple of times as we go down. Hopefully we can get it in straight. Double check. Yeah, we're good. My luck, I'd put it in upside down. And it's about as good as we're going to get, folks, right there. Once it gets down closer to the bottom, we'll readjust this thing to make sure that that hole lines up with the pin, with the, you know, the end of the shaft rather. It's let off. Okay, now we'll reset that. Now it doesn't want to be influenced anymore by the press, you know, because if the press was starting a little crooked, you kind of let it go where it wants to go. Line the bottom up a little bit better. Not quite there yet. I can't feel it hanging up on the bottom shaft yet. You know, that hole. Oh yeah, it is. I'm sorry. We are inside there. Good. See? It only go back forth so far. So now we're almost there to the bottom. Let's reset because it seemed to want to kick it. That's better. You just bottomed. That is a majorly tight crush. And there's the bottom piece. Well, that turns nice. Let's go measure it. Make sure we got the 475. Measure this one at 485, so it's 10 thou over. So from here to here is 485 instead of 475, so it's 10 thousandths more proud than it was before. According to the literature provided with this kit, the gentleman who's done a billion of these said he's seen them approximately 470 thou plus or minus 25 thou. So I think we're fine there. I had a thought that one thing we could do, but is not put the O-ring in and just go shove it into the motor and make sure that these guys bottom where they hit the engine, and if they do, then we know that this isn't bottomed. But if this bottoms first and then it's rocking like this, then we know that this thing will have to come back. So we could always do that. You know, we could check that real quick. It's probably moot, but you know, it's something we could check. So that's hitting on the body of the engine, you know, the mounting surface on the engine. It's not hitting in the center, in other words, where it would be putting axial load on the pump, both pumps actually. So we're good there. There's no problem. I don't have any problem with it that at all. And this is the engagement, the little play in the engagement of that flat in there. So we're fine. 10 thou is fine. You know, this isn't an exact science as far as the dimensions go, but you know, I always try to nail it. But you know, 10 thou is pretty good in this situation, considering how much force it took to press that in. Next step is we have to put the inner seal in the pump housing. This guy right here. And there is inside here the real fiddly parts, which is the rubber and the ceramic. And this is carbon. So this is really kind of tricky to do. You got to make sure that you don't damage this. I thought about doing tappy tap tap on this, but I think I'll just go over to the press off camera with a big socket, and I'll push this in with the press just lightly. There's no sealer required because it's got this blue band around there to seal it. That's probably the blue that we saw in there when we took the other one apart. So we got to be really careful with these guys according to the instructions, and very careful with this carbon surface here on this this side of the seal. All right, so that's what we got to do next. Okay, the seal's in. I did end up making a tool. I mean, you know me. I found a piece of aluminium with a where's my brain? With a hole already bored in it. You know, hole and bored, that came up with that. And then just pressed it in and it worked out great. So yeah, that's all ready to go. So let's move on to the next step. Gee whiz, I'm tired. Okay folks, we're down to the last two operations. What we need to do first is we need to install the ceramic seal inside the impeller. And this has already been very thoroughly cleaned, so it's ready for that. And what he recommends is to put a very thin layer inside this radius. You get a pointing tool here, the radius being inside there. So the radius to the wall of the inside here, this counter bore, or the stamping really, with this Honda Bond HT, Honda Bond High Temp, all right? And so it's just a very, very thin amount, not anything like aggressive. And then we're going to put some gloves on to prevent any cross-contamination. And then we're going to very carefully install this ceramic seal. Okay, I think that's going to be good right there. Light, very thin coat. Now put some gloves on. We're going to stick that seal in. Then the last operation is to press the impeller on the shaft. And that's going to be a little tricky too. So we got to put some Loctite sleeve retainer, Loctite 640, on the inside of this, not on the shaft, so it won't run down into the seal. Because if we put it on the shaft here and run down into the seal, we want to just put a little bit with a Q-tip or something on the inside of that bore, which is what he illustrates in his documentation. There's a shiny side on the ceramic seal. It's already installed this way on the rubber seal. Shiny side's got to be toward the inside, toward the carbon seal. So I think that's going to be fine. You know, there's just a light coat of the Honda Bond in there, like he wants. Plus this is a rubber seal behind there. So I think we're going to be just fine with that. Of course, that rubber seal is going to kind of push it down in the back anyway and kind of even it out. It's kind of hard to get the radius of my bare paw pinky in there. Okay, now we're going to go set up for that last operation. Gee, if this doesn't work, it's going to be depressing. Get it? Ha ha ha. Okay, so we're going to stage this so we can do it quick. Off camera, I'm going to put that Loctite on the impeller, but I want to get this prepped and ready to go. So as soon as I do that, I'm going to run over here and then we're going to put it in. Now on the bottom here, I have that tool that I made that's got the depth machined into it. So that's going to stop the shaft from moving. We don't want to, for example, put it on a hole where it's bottomed on the housing, could potentially push the shaft into the housing further and then screw up that dimension. So we have it on, I have it on that tool, so there's no way the shaft can go any further because the shaft is bottomed in the hole of that, as you saw before. So that's another reason why this tool is kind of handy for this. So I'm going to go do that, and I'll be right back. Sing some music in your head or something, you know, or whistle. You know, twiddle your thumbs. Don't worry, it's almost over. The agony's almost over. May not even need the handle to push it down. And that's it. Let's give it a little bit more with the handle, just a little bit more. All right, good. Now what he said was you should see a little bit of the Loctite pushed up around that hole, which I do see just a skosh. So I know there was an even coat in there. You don't need much of the sleeve retainer. I've used it many times before, and it's really good stuff. So I put a nice even coat on the inside of that, but you can see just a touch of it trying to sneak out that hole. So there's just the right amount in there, in my opinion. Spin her around. He said spin it around. Let me get you better in shot here. He said spin it around periodically for a period of time over 15 minutes to let the carbon seal, seal, whatever that is, the carbon rub seal, and that ceramic seal kind of seat. You know, you don't have to spin it fast or anything. You just kind of let it wants to find home. It wants to go home. And so that's what you're doing with that. But this feels really good. I mean, I think they're supposed to be fairly stiff, and yeah, we are. I mean, the other one was like that too, though. I think the seal was just bad. The other one felt pretty much exactly the same as this. But I think the seal, it deteriorated to the point we were getting bypass from the water side through the weep hole here, okay? So that's just the way it is, you know? It happens. All right. Oh, actually, you know what? I screwed up before. I said that was the last operation. That was technically the second to the last operation, because what we have to do now is put the seal on the back. We're just going to shove a new seal in, shove it, and then this thing's going to be ready for reinstallation. I'm not going to do that till tomorrow. I'm going to let this Loctite and everything set up overnight. Then in the morning we'll go ahead and put the water pump back in, and we'll give it a shot. I lost the audio on this, but I wanted to cover a couple of quick things. First of all, the seal. I cleaned the surface where the seal goes with a Q-tip with some brake clean on it, and made sure that that inside bore was very clean. The other thing is the seal orientation has been a subject of debate in other videos. That seal goes just like that, with the open area toward the back, not the open area toward the inside up against the bearing. I just want to make that clear. I verified that, and I double verified it. I've had comments on other videos about that on this bike when I put it in before, when I was redoing the engine, and the seal goes that way. Also, on top of the shaft, those little slots are really sharp, so I put a piece of heat shrink tubing over it to protect the seal when I slide it over the top, which I'm about to do here after I coat the outside of the seal with some Honda Bond HT. The last thing is the instructions bring up a really good point. When you go to put this seal in, there's nowhere for the air to go behind the seal, between the seal and that bearing shaft in there. So what the instructions recommend is to put something really thin down between the seal lip and the shaft itself. In this case, I'm using a little piece of wire that will let the air out. I've never thought of that before. It's actually a very, very good point. Probably why I've had trouble getting seals like this in similar situations in before. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to put this little piece of wire in, and it's going to go between the seal lip and the shaft. Then we'll go ahead and install the seal as you typically would, sliding it over that heat shrink and down the shaft. Make sure that the little pin, or that this little wire in this case, is still in place. And this will allow the thing to seat all the way down. He wants the seal just below the edge of the surface of the back of that casting, or that body of the water pump, which is what I'm doing right here. I'm getting it all the way down. So that worked out really well. I did not put any grease on the lip of the seal. I kind of forgot to do that. It's not indicated in the instructions, and also it's something you probably don't need to do, but I went ahead afterwards and just kind of used a pick tool and spread the lip out, and got the a little bit of grease in on that lip just to help the seal break in. But otherwise, it's really all you got to do on the seal on the back of this thing. All right, folks, that's it. Rebuilding a water pump from an 86 VFR750 RC24 using a kit. Okay, folks, I've shot this outro probably 87 times just to get the original version that you're not seeing right now. to where I liked it, and now I have to do it again. I'm going to show you a water pump that is no longer assembled. Yeah, had a problem with it when I went to put the cover on. The cover wouldn't go on. The cover was hitting the impeller. Now I'm going to have another supplementary video, an addendum video essentially, coming out at the same time this one comes out, not this one, the video. And it'll explain the whole thing, because this one's long enough. What I wanted to communicate in this outro is, it's not from any particular mistake I made, but I should have seen it. What ended up happening was the impeller became distorted. Now, it's too complicated and lengthy to explain at the end of this video. So the next video, the addendum video, is going to have all the detail on this and the correction. This is corrected as I hold it right here. This is fixed. And there's nothing wrong with the bearing. So we're starting from scratch, and I'm getting a new set of mechanical seals, you know, the mechanical seal you saw in the video earlier, and a new oil seal for the back of this one from the supplier, AZV65. That's it. So we're going to be able to save this. It's not a catastrophe, but it's just a setback. And again, I'm going to have it in the other video. And I want to reiterate, again, this is not from a mistake I made. Everything you've seen up to this point in this video is good practice. It worked, and there was no problem getting this thing apart based on the directions, and no problem putting it back together based on the directions. I did speak with, his name is Taz, his nickname is Taz. I spoke with him this afternoon about this, told him what happened, and he said, I've been meaning to add a section to the instructions that covers how to check for that and correct that distortion of this thing. All right, he calls it resizing after it's removed. And it's not in the current directions, and I just didn't see this. I should have seen it, though. I'm experienced enough as a machinist and everything else I do that I should have picked up on this. And again, in the next video, you'll see it. So yeah, this is the outro. Unfortunately, it's going to get stuck at the end of this video. I'm not depressed. I'm not upset about it. It's not like I need the bike tomorrow. A couple days, I'll have the water pump put back together and back in, and we'll be picking up back at that, you know, the same place anyway. Nothing's wrong with the housing, and you know, we'll be fine. It'll be fine. And in the second video, you'll see how I tested this to make sure it's running true. So, all right, that's going to be it. I mentioned earlier in the video that I was going to put the machining, you know, video clips, if you will, the little clips I rendered for making this. I'm going to wait now, and I'm going to do that in the next video, because I modified this to make this work as it should, not as you saw it in this video that I'm outroing right now. So this thing now works as it should, where you unbolt it and you essentially wrap it around the piece when it has the impeller on it, and then press the impeller off of it. All right, and it will accommodate the thickness of the seal. So you're going to see that in the next video, because I have to do it to this one. I'm not saving that. We're not saving that mechanical seal, but I needed to save this. I certainly couldn't cut this one off. So yeah, I'm going to wait till the next video. We'll put it at the end of that one. So yeah, I just wanted to do this outro, you know, face to face with you, kind of a la Watch Wes work, you know, to explain what happened, what's going on. And you'll see the conclusion of it in the next video, which will be released at the same time this one is. I guess until that video and other videos, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on those next videos.